Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave. I'm here with my co-host Greg, as I always freaking am. Like literally,
getting sick of me a little bit?
Always. He's just always here.
Yep.
Every Tuesday. You guys listen to this. Yeah. You guys listen to this, and guess who's here with me?
Yeah, it's almost like I'm, you were going to do your own show, and then I was the co-host, and I just never went away.
I bet like when they turn on this show, they're like, oh, maybe Dave's alone this time. And then I'm like, and here's my co-host Greg. And they're like,
aw.
No, I'm lying. Nobody has ever thought that ever.
No.
They're probably like, oh, Dave's still the host of this.
Facetious? That's what you're being.
Facilious.
Silly. Listen, this topic might be up my alley. I might know a lot about this topic.
Not.
Without even researching, which I didn't do a lot of because I feel like this is a more conversational ode to the daddy. Is daddy weird?
It's a little weird if you're calling yourself that. I don't really know where you're going with this.
Well, Dave, we're talking about the importance of fathers.
Yes.
That's what the episode's about. And, there's this great quote. There's a couple of great quotes that kind of like made me start to like, I was really trying to think of like what it is to be a father. And I'm thinking of my own life a lot. And you remember when we were talking about young, and this is just sort of coming to me right now, when we were talking about young and we were talking about the different archetypes, right?
Yeah.
And do you remember how when we were talking about when like mothers sort of feel like they lose their identity sometimes? I can identify with that so well. Like I feel like when I became a father, like the archetype of father sort of supplanted whatever my who Greg Charpentier was, and someone else replaced him. I took it literally that seriously. Like I have to behave in a way now that like other people are watching, and because I know that it's not just the things that I'm going to say to my kids. They don't even listen to the podcast. They don't give a shit what I say. What they're going to remember, or through osmosis or whatever, is the things that I do, the way that I act, my values. Hopefully those are the things that are getting through to them. So I have a responsibility to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And yeah, like there's this, and the quote that I was thinking about is a Steinbeck quote. My favorite book is Grapes of Wrath. This is not from that, but a boy becomes a man when a man is needed.
I thought this was Lenny in Of Mice and Men.
No, he was a terrible father. He would not have been a good father.
He would have squeezed that baby.
He would have squeezed him and crushed him. So, that idea that a man, like the idea of a man, a boy becomes a man when a man is needed, that idea has sort of changed quite a bit since that quote. But I think it remains that for somebody to learn something, they have to learn it from someone who is sure what it is. So there's a couple things that we're going to look at when we talk about the importance of the father. And I want to look at this through the lens of a couple things that I don't know if you've seen. So are you familiar with Ali Sadiq, the comedian?
I know Raphael Sadiq, the musician.
Okay. Well, that's irrelevant.
90s R&B. No.
If we had a better like producer or producer at all, they would be like, play some, Raphael Sadiq here.
Yeah.
But that then
I'll sing some.
Okay. Well, maybe later we'll hold it, put a pin in that. But Ali Sadiq does this great sort of bit. And it's true because I kind of fact checked it. I don't know if I got the numbers exactly right, but so Mother's Day is the second most celebrated holiday, right behind Christmas. That's like Jesus and then like moms. So, as hard and as difficult it is to be a mother, we're not gonna take anything away from that. It's like there's an appreciation there. But Father's Day is like the 20-something. And that's after things like Flag Day, Arbor Day. And he talks about this. This isn't sort of my observation, but he talks about how, there's holidays that I've never even heard of before, and they come before and they're celebrated more seriously than Father's Day. Like, what is that? What do you think about that?
I would love to fact check it myself because I find it hard to believe because I don't know. I've always heard of people around me celebrating Father's Day and honoring Father's Day. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, if you really break it down and kind of like analyze what's really going on, it's like, what Yeah, maybe. Not so much in my house though. Like we would acknowledge that it's Father's Day, and then what though? What would happen for the father?
He would just be able to chill out that day.
Okay. Is that okay? Well, that's pretty good for your father. And then what about this, to get stay with the comedians here, like Chris Rock has that take where I don't know if you've seen this one where he's talking about like only like, mothers and dogs get unconditional love and children, right? But fathers, like it's very conditional. Their love is like you have to provide something. Like you have to facilitate a role. Like there has to be a level of usefulness for you to be a worthwhile father. At least that's sort of like what culture is kind of perpetuating, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we got to take a look at the mental health idea, like that Thoreau quote that been very quote heavy today. But you've heard this that like men live a life of quiet desperation, and that
No,
kind of you never heard that. So it's
I've
like
never heard
that,
anyone say that.
people don't go around saying it, but it's I think it's pretty relevant. I mean, when you hear that, like men live a life of quiet desperation. It's like, just that idea of going through the motions, and it's not so much you're like appreciated, but like what you're doing is expected. And, we need to represent all these great values, but we also have to be kind of sensitive. But is there really a space for that? Is there really, culture and like modern culture would have you believe that like weakness is good. It's like almost a commodity, and it's praised in social media and everything like that. But is that really how it is in real life for men and for fathers? I mean, I'm genuinely asking. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, of course. Of
Yeah.
course.
All right. So, all right. Let me say this.
So I feel like you kind of like maybe crack that egg a little prematurely, because like I feel like that's a conversation we can get into towards the end, because I think there are some benefits to thinking about fathers and not such not having to conform to like a certain box,
Yeah.
like this, they're not just this one thing. I think it's really important, and I'll talk more about this later, but like the biggest thing with a father is kind of balancing out the partner that they're with, right? And if that means that the father has to be the sensitive one in the relationship to be able to model um emotions and how to deal with them and how to like interact with others in a kind of a sensitive way, then that's what's needed of the father, and
Yes.
that's totally fine.
I know. I in theory want to agree with you, although I feel like there's something that we've gotten away from, you know, where there is a right way to do it. Like it's almost like like remember we were talking about like toxic masculinity and like C.S. Lewis and all that. Like there is this thing where like, you know, it is important that we do have this sense of morality, like this there is this sort of real good and evil, right and wrong thing that you kind of have to instill. Like if that weren't true, and that goes beyond religion, goes beyond philosophy, anything. It's like there is this collective, if we can believe there's a collective unconscious, we could believe there's a collective morality that we're all kind of supposed to be, living in accordance with. And if that's not true, then there would have been no, Nuremberg trials. That wouldn't have been able to be a thing because we all sort of agreed together, hey, that's wrong. And it's like, based on what? And it's like, oh, we just all have this idea of like what our morality is. And I think that in the same way, we all used to have this idea of like why a father is important, the lessons he has to teach us. And we've gotten far away from that. And I think that kind of reflects in society now. Right? I think there is a right way to do it. It's like the impact of a father, like in culture.
Wait,
like,
so I just got to stop you for a second. So you're saying historically it was done correctly and now it's not? Because I beg to differ that it's ever been done
not exactly
correctly across the board.
No, not exactly. No, and I don't. You're right.
Like you look at like some of almost the image I was getting that was coming to mind when you're describing some of this like father figure. I almost think of like John Hamm's character in Mad Men, and I'm like, that's a terrible father.
So all right, so you're right. Right. Hold on, but you're right.
But he's fitting all the responsibilities, and he's being that stereotypical dad, but that's
So-
not a good father, right?
Well, so here's the thing. I think that we have this tendency to like think just because we do things differently now, it's like better. And I don't know if that's always true. And I think in a lot of ways you're right. But I think culturally, and as far as like manliness, and here we go again, I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, I think we went a little too far sometimes. Like, it's okay. Like, some of those things are okay. Like, it's good for your father to be like this stoic, tough figure, I think. Right? I think there's some usefulness in that.
Unless your mother is a stoic, tough figure.
That's true too.
And then you have two stoic, tough figures, and then you don't learn about emotions. That's
Right,
what I'm saying. I think the parents really need to balance each other out, because if you have too much of one thing, that kid is screwed. And they don't learn that ability to be able to balance they don't learn how to balance other people out. They don't, and you know how difficult it is for them to navigate relationships after that. So that's kind of what I mean. I don't think the father necessarily has to be the stereotype if the person he ends up having, you know, parenting with doesn't fit their, you know, quote unquote stereotype. You know what I mean? Right. Or if you have two dads, or if you have,
or
you know,
moms.
two moms.
I know. I understand that.
There's still you know, a like quote unquote father figure that would be present in those relationships. You know what I mean?
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp.
You know, one of the things I've been thinking about lately is how effective just talking can be.
Yeah, so many of people hold on to things, Dave. We bottle them down. You know, we feel our problems aren't big enough to need therapy, but this is the furthest thing from the truth.
And I know for me, therapy allowed me to have a space to discuss things I hadn't really discussed with anyone before.
That's true, Dave. And I wonder about some of those things you were talking about. It sparked my interest a little bit. But one of the greatest benefits of therapy is having your own space and being able to express whatever it is you've been holding on to.
With how convenient access is in today's day and age, there's absolutely no reason not to try therapy.
Exactly. And BetterHelp is one of the most convenient ways to give it a try. It's completely online and will work around your schedule, so you don't ever have to leave your house.
And the best part of it, if you don't get that tingly feeling from your selected therapist, you can switch it up with no fee.
Or maybe if you do get that tingly feeling, you might want to switch it up. But BetterHelp understands how important it is that you feel connected with your therapist.
So get it off your chest with BetterHelp.
And visit betterhelp.com/nothing today to get 10% off your first month.
That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nothing.
So I think in both those situations, and this is going to be controversial,
but I also wasn't just saying that would be the case that I'm talking about. There's male and female relationships where, you know, personality traits lead to a father maybe having a different role than.
Absolutely. And I think that's absolutely useful. And not to say that this has to be the blueprint, but I think I do think that you know, ideally there needs to be a male influence, and equally as importantly, and obviously in the early stages, and we'll get to like historically, mothers are, you know, the major contributor in like child rearing, and that's still true. That's probably always going to be true, but the numbers have shifted a little bit. But mothers are this wonderful, beautiful, nurturing force, and what I'm saying is that's great and necessary, and for development, we need that more than anything in the world. But for adolescents, as we're getting older, there's this other figure that's needed that is maybe more important in transition to adulthood. Because if you think about, it's almost all right, Dave, let me do this in terms of therapy for you. Mothers are going to, and this is just speaking very like, you know, broadly and generically, and obviously there's all kinds of different family situations, and there's no right or wrong way to do this, but we're just talking about in terms of fathers for today, right? Mothers would be like person-centered therapy, unconditional positive regard. We're there for you, we're nurturing, and we're gonna, you know, we're this rock that you can kind of always come back to. And then fathers sometimes represent something a little bit different, like this existential therapy, or something where it's like you're gathering some grit. It's like, hey, you can't come back. Like there's a world out there and you need to be ready for it. And there needs to be someone who prepares you for that part of the world, who, maybe that nurturing thing isn't the best thing for you when you need to be leaving the nest. Maybe you need something that's going to be a little more rigid and a little more, treat you a little bit more like the world is going to treat you. And you need that kind of preparation. Right? Disagree?
Sure.
Okay.
I disagree that it has to be from the father. I agree that should be messages that they're getting. I agree that both of those things are incredibly valuable to children and their upbringing. And as long as they're getting those messages, the child is in a way better shape than if they're not getting those messages from at least, from it, in a perfect world, there are two parents present.
Mm-hmm.
And one is playing the role of this mother figure, and the other one is playing the role of this father figure that this episode is kind of talking about, that is so valuable. I don't care what it looks like. It just they need that in their lives.
Yeah.
And
So
that's what I'm saying.
And the sad thing is like, you can't even say that without being controversial. But the reality is that biologically and every other way, it's like, ideally, yes. And you can call it whatever you want. Like a masculine type role and a feminine type role is sort of the perfect situation for the development into adulthood. I mean, that's just the way it's kind of set up. And that doesn't have to be a gender thing, right? It doesn't, like you're saying, it doesn't have to
Yeah,
be.
exactly.
Like you can have a masculine influence and a feminine influence with two men or two women.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's completely possible.
The thing I think that we can say safely without being controversial.
Oh, I like being controversial.
There is a very large problem in the U.S. with absent fathers.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a father who has a baby and is no longer in that child's life, and that is a problem. So according to the U.S. Census Bureau, out of 18.3 million children, 1 in 4 live without a biological step or adopted father in the home. So there's more than 15 million families in the U.S. that are single mother households. Mm-hmm. And over 7 million fathers are absent from the lives of their children. So those are astonishing numbers.
They're big numbers.
And I think the biggest thing for us to focus on, because it's not controversial. If we take those stats, there's nothing controversial.
No, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it's okay to say, and it's like, it's okay to say that a father's role is extremely important.
Right.
And look, whether he's going to be there in your life or not there in your life, there's going to be an influence.
So for fathers for anyone listening who is a father that's present, that's active in their child's life, just by doing those simple things that probably felt like second nature. I mean, maybe you thought about running away, but I'm sure, but for whatever reason you didn't. You gave your child a step up on over what I say, 15 million other families.
Yeah,
that's crazy numbers. But and for something that for a lot of people would probably just be like, I wouldn't even question that.
Well, I think the vast majority of people take,
and I don't mean like you have to stay in the relationship, but even just staying present in the child's life puts that child at an advantage over other people. And what type of advantage?
Oh, let's get into some of this. What can I say one first?
Sure.
All right, because this one's before the baby is even existing. Like this is a kind of an incredible stat, and it just to speak to the biology of it. And it's, if a father's not around during the pregnancy, the death rate increases 4 times. Now, that's not, in Puritan New England. That's like right now stats. So, and also like on top of that, if the father's depressed, the baby is much more likely to be depressed. So, if you're a dad and, you get into a situation where you've gotten a woman pregnant and you guys are staying together and all this, or whatever, be with the mom. It's evolution, right? Like, I'm not trying to win any social justice awards here, but like, it's science. If the couple that is together is to give the baby the best chance, obviously there's conditions where that's not going to make sense, but ideally those two people staying together is beneficial to the baby from the womb.
Yeah. So some easy to list advantages where a child is raised in I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Some
Hmm.
disadvantages for a child that's raised in a father absent home. There's a greater risk of poverty, a greater risk of infant mortality, more likely to have behavioral issues, more likely to commit a crime, more likely to go to jail, more likely to become pregnant as a teen, more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, more likely to suffer obesity, and more likely to drop out of school. And 71% of high school dropouts are from fatherless homes, and 85% of youth in prison grew up in fatherless homes.
Yeah, 85% of youth in prison grew up in fatherless homes. I mean, what? So the guardrails aren't there, right? Like that's sort
Right.
of like that's a father's sort of role to kind of create those
And,
guardrails. And then when you're only being nurtured, maybe in a lot of those cases, like the mother's nature is to nurture. And
well, no, think about even this. If it's a single parent home, think about what that mom has to do in order to keep that family afloat. So, I
mm,
mean, you're also talking about an absence of any kind of parent figure for periods of time, just out of pure necessity to survive.
yeah.
Right. So if this mom has to work a crazy amount of hours, that child sometimes will be, they have to grow up faster.
Hmm.
And
And they don't really have that in your face model of like, how do I do this? You
right.
know, because the more, still the statistics kind of remain that where like, especially with in homes with more than one child, that the father is typically the bigger earner, right? And so, like, how do you do that? So you end up in prison. Like, how do you do that? Like, you lose a lot of this stuff that you learn just by observing. You know what I mean? It's so interesting. And then, what do you think? What do you make of like? Oh, did you hear this stat? Over 90% of runaways and homeless did not have a father in the house. That's staggering.
Yeah.
90%. That's a huge number. 65% of youth suicides didn't have a father.
So the first grouping of stats that I read, those are from the National Fatherhood Initiative, which has a ton of great information if you want to look more into the importance of fatherhood and kind of the impact that it makes having a present father versus the risks of people without fathers. I really urge people to go check that out if this is something that interests you, because there's a ton of information on there. Also, like talking about the future for children, father absent children are more likely to divorce or dissolve their cohabiting unions and are more likely to have children outside of marriage or outside of any partnership. So
Mm.
it's setting up that child for disadvantages, growing up, but also in their own adulthood, in their future relationships. So it really does show that not having a father present has a major impact. Or
Yeah, it matters.
I really, and like it was important for me to kind of acknowledge that there's different types of fathers. And I still feel very strongly about that. I don't think a father has to fit this stereotype in order to be a father. Um, and I also acknowledge that there's other types of fathers. There's, like I said, they can have same sex, foster fathers, adopted fathers, stepfathers, also single like lone fathers, like not
Yeah, tons of that
no
now. That's
um
actually on the way up, way up. Those numbers are kind of
yeah,
insane. It's getting close to where it's like as many single dads as there are single moms.
right.
And
Separated fathers, and then there's fathers that are still with their partners. So a lot
so
of
you're
different
right though,
types.
Dave, in kind of like clarifying that a little bit because I sometimes have to check my own, how do we know what we know because of our own experience, right? And like,
Right. And I hear that very strongly in like your views. And I know you, and
mm,
I've met your dad a number of times. So like when you describe things, I understand like the frame from where which you're coming. Um and I also know my own experiences, but like it is important to me that we explore the other experiences, because I mean, just in therapy alone, the number of children that I work with, there's so many contradictory um parenting styles than the type you described. Like I have so many
oh yeah,
moms that
look,
are like actually the ones that are like that real world, like you're out of the house, and the dad is actually the pushover that's like, I shouldn't say pushover, but like the one that's like, trying to give 1,000 chances, and ends up being, I guess you would say, in your definition, would end up being the nurturing one. Like I've seen that so many times, and I don't know if that's a culture shift. I don't know if that's a societal change or if it's just always been present. But we have these stereotypes from what we see in movies or in film or what, I don't know. But I see so many different types. I'm like, so it's important to me to speak to everybody because like this is for everybody, right? And I know you know this. I'm not
like,
saying
and to be clear on that too. So like I come from a, if I sound a little like antiquated with my views on manliness, I'm working on it. But I'll only work on it to a certain extent. And if you've met my dad, trust me, you would know, Dave would tell you, I have worked on it quite a bit. And I am a father of all boys. So to be kind of transparent on that, I think that makes me a little bit different too, because I want them to all be sort of chasing values. I really do believe in this thing where, as therapists, Dave's, it's like our base desires are going to drive our behavior. Our logic isn't going to be the thing that makes us do the right thing, but it is going to be those values that we teach these kids that can sort of separate them from everybody else, right? Those are the things that are like, we don't worry about values enough in this society. It's almost like when they say chivalry is dead, it's like, yeah, it is. And that kind of stinks because I think, trying to work, not be ideal, but work towards an ideal, try to like, embody some of these values of like, I don't know, like courage and honesty and like strength and like, I don't know, all these things that I find value in. I try to make my kids find value in them too, because I really do believe that, they're put in a world where, you know, their self-interests are going to drive them, their base desires are going to drive them. But if I can install some kind of like, the value system, it's like that hopefully will be more powerful than anything else. And I know you feel that way too in some ways, because that's what we talk about in Amazement when we talk about Viktor Frankl and how, some people let the children lay on the ground and get stepped over or stepped on by the Nazi soldiers, and some people their own demise stepped in and said, no, I'm going to do something about this, even if it kills me. Like my values are going to win over, my needs and my base desires right now. And I think that's like what separates great people from the rest. And I want that for my kids, I want that for them. And that's not an easy life.
But Greg, everything you just said kind of highlights one thing to me. You have put thought into the type of father you want to be. You have, and that's great. And that's the goal is, if you want to be a good parent, like you don't even have to be a good parent in order to like give your kids some advantage. We're basically saying if you're there for your kid's already at an advantage from a kid that's growing up in
I say to people,
father absent home.
You just said it there. If you want to be a good parent, and then you can just leave it there, because that's literally 90% of it.
Yeah.
If you want to be a good parent, you're doing okay.
If you want to strive to be the best father you can ever be, then thinking about things like what Greg's talking about, I think is super helpful. Like what is it I really want my kids to learn from me, and what is it I really want to instill in them? And when they go off on their own and they're grown up, how do I want them to treat others? I think those are the things that takes people maybe a step above, or just like, I think actually, Greg, I think it's even more than that. I think it's what gives the father themselves the meaning, what feels good to them, because it's like, it's less about, not that it's not about your kids, because it's all about what you're teaching your kids. Like it's more about like, I feel that gives you meaning, right?
Yeah,
gives you
absolutely.
meaning as a person, as a dad. And that's a big thing, because like, why? All right, just putting this out there. Unfortunately, for some people, it might be a question: why should I stick around? Why should I be present in this kid's lives? I'm not appreciated. Maybe they feel that way. Maybe they feel like the mom is fine on their own. Whatever. Maybe there has to be some value to being a father. And I think that's it. It's finding the meaning of being a father.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know what? I'm talking here like I'm doing the best job in the world, and it's like that's not true either, because I often like right now on the back of my hand, Dave can even tell you, it says fun, because a lot of times like they'll be behaving a certain way, and I'll be looking at them and be like, no, you can't do that, or I think one of the major jobs that I have as a dad is to make my kids likable. Like I want them to be likable to other people. I think that's a huge asset. If you're in a group of people and you're likable, then you're going to do okay in life. And so like sometimes I'm always so rigid and like I'm always overthinking with like, am I being a good dad? Am I teaching them this? Are they going to fail if this happens? That I have to like literally write down sometimes like just let them have fun too. Just be fun. And or I get home and I've been out, working hours and hours and hours. Sometimes you and I work, 16 hours, 17 hours a day sometimes. Who knows, right? And it's like, they don't know that I really do just want to spend that time. There's like a lot of guilt there too for dads. Like they don't know that I just want to like be there with them and spend that time with them, but I also have to do this thing. Like I owe them, at least for me to give my best shot at giving them the best future I possibly can. So they can't really understand that. And it's always this wrestle with dads. It's like, am I there enough? Am I working hard enough? Am I bringing home enough? Like it's such, there's a mental health aspect here where it's like you can't really get this right. And I think part of it is being okay with that.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
trying your best.
It's like that with anything. It's like that with mothers, it's like they don't have to be the perfect mom. We spent a couple episodes, 2 different episodes about talking about that same concept for moms. You just being concerned about being a mom and how you're doing is a sign that you're probably a good mom, right? Because
Mhm.
you care. And the same goes for dads. Just caring about this stuff means a lot.
It really does. And there's so much you want to teach them too. It's interesting. All
Yeah.
right.
So one of the things that is super important though is how I keep going back to this idea of balance in a
Yeah.
relationship. What does that mean to you when I say that balance in a relationship?
I think like you're talking about the masculine and the feminine. You're talking about
No,
like,
I think it's more general. I think it's just having like a well-rounded model of what interactions should look like or could look like and how you handle them. And it doesn't always have to be one certain way. But it's kids are sponges.
yeah,
So when they watch their parents interact, they're taking that in. And it's said, and I believe this to be true, that how a father interacts with, their partner in the relationship or, with them kind of really does impact how they're going to go and interact with people outside of that.
yeah, no pressure, right?
Right.
You know
So
what I mean?
if a dad's treating his partner disrespectfully, abusively, how do you think that kid's going to treat others? Maybe they engage in bullying or domestic issues as they get older, stuff like that. So it's
Well,
super
absolutely.
important.
And like it's kind of simple. Like they did all this research and like they came and we probably talked about this the most too, but like the best model or the predictor for a well-rounded child or their happiness in the future is the happiness of the parents. It's like,
Right.
yeah, no, like that makes perfect sense, right? Like you see your parents happy, you're living in a happy home, you're gonna be a happy person. You're gonna want to like kind of perpetuate that. But then that puts a lot of pressure on the family because there's like a lot of stress and like finances are tough these days. It's like there is so much pressure on this. And it's like I think with dads, from what I hear, because I do have a lot of men, and what I think that they're kind of looking for most of all is just this acknowledgement, maybe like appreciation. There's, you know, there's this great story in World War II where there was this hospital and it was filled with absolute depressives. It was all men. They were almost catatonic. They were so depressed. And when there was the bombing in London over and over again, every night after night after night, they had a need for ambulance drivers, right? And they got these people involved. They were driving ambulances around. They felt like they had a purpose. They felt like they have a duty, and they felt like they were appreciated. And they had meaning. And none of them met the criteria for major depressive disorder after that. They just didn't. And so I really feel like there's something here with fathers that ties into that. Like we will like crawl over glass if we think that it's going to be appreciated. If we think that it's going to help our family forward. I think that's the truth with most men. I see that a lot. They want to. I think that appreciation is needed. I think that's a love language for a lot of fathers, like just acknowledgement and appreciation. I really do. I mean, that's how I feel. And the people who I obviously don't share that when I hear people say it, but in my mind, I'm like, we have someone in common who is like, you take care of their kids, obviously in a therapy point of, and
I'm their babysitter.
Yeah. You take care of the kids while I talk to them. No, and I talk to the dad, and you know who I'm talking about. And it's been a long, difficult road, but like, kind of finding that for him, helping him find that, and like maybe even doing a little work with his partner, like and finding that he's appreciated, and you know, he's working hard, and people are seeing that. It's really helped him out quite a bit.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's about, but I feel that.
Yeah. And there's this thought that I had. So, like talking about how they model. So if you're talking about towards sons, a lot of how they're interacting is going to be modeled for the sons. So if they're treating people with respect and caring, and the son's probably going to grow up to do the same. It's interesting to think about how it impacts daughters. And I know this is probably something you have a little bit less experience with.
Sure.
But for younger daughters, historically they kind of lean on their fathers for like security and emotional support. But the biggest thing like the father does is they kind of are able to demonstrate like what a good relationship with a man could look like if that's what the daughter's into. So it's, if a father is loving and gentle, the daughter is probably going to look for those types of qualities. If a father is strong and valiant, like those are qualities that she's probably going to look for in her partner down the road. So it's interesting to think about how that frames, a daughter's romantic interests.
It's actually really interesting. And it's almost funny. Like I wanted to be like a little jokey and be like, Dave, did your dad do a lot of modeling for you? But as you're saying that, I'm thinking, this is that archetype thing we're talking about. It's like you do sort of lose a bit of your identity when you become a parent. And I think that's okay, because you're saying you have to sort of become the man you want your daughter
if you're not already.
With,
I mean, unless you're meeting that standard, right?
Yeah. That's interesting.
No, but you have to be more
weird.
present.
It's almost incestuous, but it's like
you do have to be more present, knowing that your interactions are going to are going to influence your son and daughter as they look for partners.
If you're treating your partner, like if you have a daughter and you're either abusive to your wife or girlfriend or whatever, you're teaching your daughter it's okay to be in a relationship where this happens.
Yeah. And and Greg, that's why like when we meet with people, especially like 20 and 30-year-old women who have a history of just bad relationships, and we have to like look, I mean, that's a time where I think it's helpful to look at like the root cause of like why you keep getting into these relationships. And a lot of times you learn things about like their upbringing that kind of ring true to this.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like, all right, so we have to break the pattern here. We have to break this because you're doing these repetitive relationships where you're just jumping into the same style of relationship from what you knew when you were growing up.
It's important. It's inappropriate to say the term here, but I think we're talking about the same thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Daddy issues.
Oh boy,
that's what it is,
right.
And like that's a thing,
it's
right?
A thing.
Certainly,
it's a thing that people talk about for sure, and I'm sure we'll do it. We had talked about that being a future episode if it's accepted.
Yeah.
So let us know.
Yeah.
But no, so this is interesting stuff. But Greg, I had a question for you kind of along these lines. So for like kids who don't, absent father homes, right? We often talk about like this idea that kids go down a bad path. And as soon as you say that, they talk about gangs. All right, well, if you live in an area with gangs, then yeah, sure, maybe. But like even for like us suburban kids, like maybe we weren't going to end up in like the Bloods or the Crips, but we probably could have ended up in like some trouble behavior, right?
Yeah.
I just love that when like when they always talk about kids going down the wrong path, they always bring up gangs. I was like,
yeah,
I was looking for gangs. I didn't find
the Crips didn't want me.
No,
I
you were
listened to
part of the Buttonwoods boys in
yeah,
Cranston, so
yeah.
I mean that was about as gang as we were getting. But like,
There was also the Oakland Beach Posse,
my God,
a really
it,
tough
it
gang
gets
down by the beach community.
right next to
Yeah.
Iggy's
Yeah.
Chowder House.
Be careful when you're getting doughboys. Oakland Beach Posse's out there.
You got to watch out for razor blades in those doughboys.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man.
So,
Thanks.
I have a question for you. I kind of think I've come up with some kind of like conclusion about this, but like, why is it that you think that kids so commonly stray to negative influences when they are feeling like, they're lost, or there's like an absent father, and you hear these stories about kids going into gangs or bad, making poor choices? Why do you think that they tend to gravitate towards these negative influences,
Ah,
negative
yeah.
people, you know?
Maybe because they can relate to the negative emotions on some level. I think there's no one that has been showing them, like teaching them the opposite, the values and the difficulties, but the importance of that. I don't know. It's tough, but they,
I have a thought, and I think you on your outline, you were kind of mentioned this and you didn't say it. You made a note about a dad teaches you how to survive.
yes,
I think it is survival but instinct. And I think that there is something about feeling secure. If I go into the thing that's like bad, quote unquote bad or scary, or like there's a presence about those kind of people. Like, I'm going to be safe in there though, because if I'm part of them, they're not going to be, I'm
oh
not
yeah,
against them. So it's like, I think we just kind of naturally gravitate to these like alpha figures. And for kids, what's more alpha than like the cool group of, dudes that's like doing drugs and breaking
dude.
rules, like
You know who you're talking about right now?
the guy that wasn't part of that.
The
Like,
Foot
you weren't
Clan.
allowed in that.
Do you remember the?
Oh, the Foot Clan. So you're talking
Remember
about
that and
yourself.
the
I'm like,
original, the
yeah,
original,
yeah.
yeah, like
Oh, Ninja
Danny,
Turtles. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like he
Yo,
was like, I identify with these people. We're family. They understand me.
yeah.
Like they're also outcast.
I was actually thinking in my head about like the cult classic 90s film Kids, which I think we might have mentioned on one other episode, which is like one of my all-time favorite movies. It's awesome. But like, it's a bunch of kids that basically you can make an assumption that there's not a lot of parental supervision happening in their lives, and they all just engage in like drinking and sex and you know just reckless behavior. But it's one of those things in my mind. It's like, you get involved in it. Why? Because it's probably safer for you to feel, or you feel like you're a part of something too. You feel like there's some guidance in there, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're going to take care of me. They're going to show me the ropes to survive.
And then there's like whoever's in charge is usually, it's pretty an insidious thing where they make you feel like this is the good thing, but it's really not. They're kind of using your vulnerability, and your father maybe would have been able to teach you to beware that kind of person,
I
right?
think if you have a figure in the home that kind of provides some guidance against that, then you don't necessarily stray to seek it. I mean, I think every kid goes through a rebellion phase, so
Yeah.
you're gonna have some trouble regardless with an adolescent. But I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
there's
yeah.
like a stronger pull to that side when they don't have that
The
person.
guardrail, like so like
Yeah, yeah.
this is the line that you're talking about. I was looking for that on the in the outline. It says, "A mother will teach you to love. A dad teaches you to survive," and it's true. It's true. Like I really believe that there's
I
things.
do think, like, not to knock single mothers. Like, I'm sure I know there are single mothers that care about, teaching their kids to survive. But I think that there is this idea that with father absent homes, that a kid is going to explore more because they're feeling like they have to replace something that there's a void, right?
And sometimes the single moms feel like they need to replace the father, and then they get themselves into bad relationships.
Sure.
I mean, it's a
Absolutely.
definitely the cycle. But actually, I'm thinking of a single mother right now, who raised three kids on her own incredibly. Um, so that
Yeah.
pokes a little bit of a hole in that. But I mean,
Yeah.
no, but no, obviously,
100%.
but it's like she was able to admittedly, and she would say that she had to be a father role too.
Yes. And
She had to.
that's what this is all like. This is not to say that there is not hope for people that, are single parents.
Always hope.
It always hope. It's just this the stats, are pointing to that when there is a father present, there a lot of these things, these risks are minimized, I guess
Mm,
you would say.
yeah.
But obviously nothing is certain and nothing is 100%.
So Dave, we've kind of covered a lot of this, right? Like I
Yeah.
think, that idea of, you know, I think what scares people away when you talk about like fathers leaving initially is like an unfulfilled life, like we were talking about in the beginning, like having to give up on your dreams and your goals for the betterment of a family. And I think there's something kind of be- beautiful about that, right? Like, I mean, because what's more important than, it- raising people, who are going to do better than you ever could? I just think that's something, and it makes everything sort of worthwhile again, like Halloween, and actually we do fine with that on our own, but Christmas is fun again, and like there is something really meaningful about being a dad. So Dave, you wrote a little thing here, like what is a dad? Like thoughts on
Yeah.
what a dad is. Like what do you think?
Um, well, yeah, I was going to kind of say, I guess I was going to kind of leave it as like a question to you. But like the reason why I posed the question, I think we've kind of defined what a dad is throughout this whole conversation. Like, and one of the things I just want to kind of go back for 1 second is
Yeah.
part of the reason why it's been important for me to kind of talk about um, that idea that a dad doesn't have to be a stereotype is also if it's not natural for an individual to parent in the stereotypical way, that doesn't mean they shouldn't parent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like like if having that stereotype could almost like scare dads, can almost scare some fathers away. My
Yeah.
mic's dropped twice, so I apologize, and not in a cool way, not in
Yeah.
like a mic drop way. Um, but like I don't want people to like steer away from it because like, oh, I would never be a good dad, or I couldn't do, I'm not that type of person. Anybody can be a dad. So, but what is a dad? Does it have to be like the biological figure?
Um, no, I don't think so. But I do think there is, I think that like to go back to that, framework, the archetype, there is like a nurturer, and you can call it whatever you want. So like you can think of the mother as the nurturer, the sort of someone who kind of gets you out of, like, protects you through infancy into childhood, and it plays that hugely important, difficult role. And then there's the person who's going to introduce them to the world, right? And I think that's the difference there. I think there's just archetypes, and I don't think it has to be, like a gender thing or whatever. It doesn't really matter. I do really do think that, though, there's like two opposing, not even opposing, but like two separate forces that when in balance, create the best possibility for
All
the
right. So you just took it back
future
to
of the
like
child.
that whole argument again. So I was actually going a different
Yeah.
direction.
Yep. All right. Well,
So what
no,
I
I
kind of
mean,
wanted
look.
to point out was that there are other figures in a child's life that can fit these father-like values or these
Oh, yeah.
father-like roles, and I think they can have a lot of value too. And I guess I wanted to speak to them a little bit because I feel like I fit in some of those roles for a lot of individuals that I work with. And it's not to like call myself a father in any way, but it's like if you're out there and you are in these roles for kids, you have value too. And I think that's important to be recognized because you are imprinting on a child's development and their outlook in life. So I'm talking about teachers, mentors,
Mhm.
coaches, uncles, like older cousins, therapists. Like there's so many ways that you can impact on a child in a lot of the ways that we're talking about here. So if you are in any of those roles for a kid who doesn't have, is in like a single parent home, you have so much value to that individual's life. You have value to someone with two parents, but still with a single parent, there's so much that you can do along the lines to give that kid that extra advantage and to counterbalance some of those risks that we were mentioning earlier. So I think there's a lot of value. I heard somebody giving a talk recently, and he was mentioning that, and it kind of like rang true to me, because I was like thinking about some of the conversations I've had recently, and some of like the with some of my younger patients too. They've really started to open up with me, and it's so hard for like an 8 or a 9-year-old to really get comfortable enough where they're like talking to you about like almost like they get to the point of like second nature of opening up
Yeah.
about things that are difficult. But when you get there, it's like a really great feeling. Like, wow, I got here. This kid's letting me in now. Like, this kid is opening up for me and talking to me because he appreciates the input that I'm going to give. Like, he doesn't think I'm just going to give some boring response. And
No, yeah, that's great. And you're right. And here's a couple of things to speak to that. I think fathers, when you're out there and you're having a difficult time, don't forget your friends. People forget how important friendship can be, right? And how useful that can be to kind of bounce things off of. I really think that's like a forgotten sort of virtue, sort of like, if you read like Aristotle and the Nicomachean Ethics, I don't know if you've ever seen that book, but there's like 2 whole chapters based on like the importance of friendships. It was so important for so long. And when you have a really good friend, you kind of understand why that is. Like, I've had to, Dave, we've become great friends through all this time. This is a super important relationship.
yes, Greg, I will take your kids if something bad happens to you.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for asking just now.
Yeah.
I knew that's where you were going. Yeah.
This will serve as my will. This episode. Just find it. Yeah.
I will take 4 out of 5 of your kids.
I think it also, what the hell was it? Oh yeah. So I remember, you're right that other people can have a huge influence on you growing up. Because I remember my friend's father being a huge influence on me,
Mm-hmm.
almost being like a softer version than my father. Because my father was very, like if I would like, there was no crying, there was no this or there was no that. So it was like he was the kind of guy who understood like, there could be a little more balance, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's okay. But he ended up giving the speech at my wedding. That guy, because we got that close. The wedding.
Oh, that's awesome.
It didn't work out, but it was a good speech, nonetheless. So I was going to say this to you. I was going to ask you this. Like, say when down the road, Dave, when maybe there's little Dave walking around, would you have any required like listening, watching, or reading for a child? Or when you speak to these kids, is there anything that you tried? I know that you've been, and I've actually borrowed this from you, which I think is really cool, is like teaching these young kids like chess, like something like a little bit more cultured, you know? Like I think
it teaches them patience, and it teaches them to think 2 to 3 moves ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And when they start to do that and you watch them, they do this awesome thing with me where like they'll start to tell me what move they were going to do. And then they'll say, but if I do that, you're going to do this. And I'm like, they get it. I know that in that moment right there, I'm like, now apply that to real life.
Mm-hmm.
When you make a decision, think about what could be an outcome that's going to happen with that. So that's kind of where that whole like thought process started with doing the chess. And it's just turned into this whole different thing. And now I have like an army of chess players.
Chess is super useful. I really do. I think that it's like very important and could be, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a cool move.
Yeah. As far as like, I don't know. I don't think I would show this like too young. One of the dads that always stuck out to me because it was like an unorthodox depiction of a dad, and like, it's just a dad trying his best. Lawrence Fishburne in Boys in the Hood as Cuba Gooding Jr.'s dad. He's like a single dad. He is trying to show his kid, but he's like trying to connect with him. So he's doing it in a way that like he knows my son's old enough now where he's not going to hang out with me if I like lecture him all the time. So I have to like frame, he still does lecture him, but he does it in like a cool way that like is his kid wants to be around him. But like
Yeah.
they show up, bring it like up his upbringing before he was like an older individual, and like he was not like the best dad, right? He had his shortcomings, and he's just doing the best he can and using the knowledge he has to share with his kid. And that's so that like that character just always stuck out to me because he's just always got something wise to say about like anything he sees, and he's always warning him like, oh, be careful of that and make sure you use protection, and like just
Yep.
all the stuff that like you'd want Lawrence Fishburne telling you if he was your dad.
Useful stuff.
Yes,
That's for sure. Yeah, no, so yeah, I guess I wouldn't really, I mean, required listening, I'd probably like, I do have all that stuff. Like, Rockies are important. Like, the Beatles are important. Yeah. Reading, we could go down forever with that, right? Like Man's Search for Meaning for sure, once they can kind of get there. Um, C.S. Lewis, the Narnia books, I think those teach you a ton of lessons. What a future episode for us, Aesop's Fables. Try to get them to kind of like we talk about that, and then like try to get them to like sort of see the meaning in those, and that's a useful thing. Like, do these kids, do they even have the capacity to know what the hell is going on here? Right? I mean,
right.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah,
for sure.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
Do you think that the father role impact changes based on like cultural expectation of what the father role is? So, like for example, remember when we did the Things Fall Apart episode? Yeah. Okonkwo is like this guy that's just always like fighting and leading, and he's kind of like abusive to his kids, but like to some extent, not all of it. Like he was probably harsher than most, but some of this is like a cultural thing too, right?
Yeah.
Like, does the impact change?
Yeah, so I think that across cultures it's sort of similar, isn't it?
Like I think back to like I guess like kind of the example with that one, or maybe that wasn't the best example, but for like, all right, so here's like a example in like the animal world.
Okay.
Like lions have kids and they don't spend any time with their kids. In fact, they'll freaking eat their kids, right?
90% of mammals don't. It's like it's even higher than that. It's like 95% of mammals don't really take care. The fathers just bail.
And like think of a culture where maybe that's kind of like the status quo, where like the dad has the kids, but like their job is to hunt and lead.
I think it kind of becomes set up for whatever their society is and whatever works to perpetuate the society. So like the reason why animals do that is because human beings, because our head is like, our brains are so big, so our heads are big, so we have to give birth a lot earlier. So and then do the rest of the developing outside of the womb, where other animals do a ton of their developing inside the womb and come out and they're like ready to get a job. You know what I mean? So it's like the father, we've sort of evolved in this way where the father has become much more necessary. And that's why you see things where like, the death rate in children is so much higher if the father's not around, even in pregnancy, because that's a an evolutionary sort of strategy. It's crazy. Like I think whatever helps the society perpetuate itself is what,
because then I guess like if it's modeled, then the kid will fall into that role, and then that kind of like, and like our society's different though, like
it's changing a lot, and that's what's and that's why I think that's why I always kind of lean back and say, hold on, like can we go back to some of these? I don't want to go back to the 1950s where we're like slapping people and it's shitty in a lot of ways, but I do want to kind of like go back there where there's like a more of an emphasis on quality. There's more of an emphasis on values. There's decorum. Like I am getting old and I see people like walking around in like pajama bottoms, and I'm like, put some fucking clothes on, put your best foot forward, right? You know what I mean? Does that bother you at all or not really?
Well, I was someone who wouldn't even wear sweatpants for
Me neither,
the longest time.
Dave,
I just started, and it's
you
awesome.
Beautiful dress shoes every time I see you. You're looking like a no, but seriously though, there's something to that. I think there's an importance there, and I think we've really gotten away from that, and I think
we're also like our society is so driven on just talk. everything's about talking. And and I probably shouldn't be saying this because our jobs are based on talking.
Yeah.
But like so little of our society is based on like actual action. And it's all like you can get in trouble for what you say, but you can also be so valued for what you say. And like everything is just talk based. And there's so little, and they put so little value into what people are actually like viewing. And I
And
think that like we're
Carl
talking about
Jung
other, yeah, we're talking about other societies where like the whole society thrives based on their actions, what
Right.
they're doing
Yeah.
to benefit the society, their society. And we don't have that. We just have thoughts and opinions and talk.
I think we do have that. I think our society is thriving less because we do talk too much and do less.
Yes, that's kind of what I get. There needs to be back to that. There needs to. Well, I don't know if there ever was, but there needs to be a balance where it's like you also have to back up with actions. You have to show who you are. I say this to youth all the time because I just think there's so much value. You can tell me whatever you want to tell me, but I will only believe in it when I start to see the actions behind those words. Because until you start to show me actions, guess what?
You're not what you say. I say it to my kids all the time. You're not what you say you are. You're not what you are the things that you do. Your actions tell me the story of who you are, not the things you say you're going to do. Like you are what you repeatedly do. I mean, that's just it.
Just to argue with you for one more second.
Sure.
I want to go back to a way earlier thing you said. So like with emotions and like the father role with emotions, I think there's actually such value to a father having some high emotional intelligence and being able to demonstrate emotions in front of a child and also show how to regulate emotions. Because I can't tell you how many times we hear people come in like that wasn't demonstrated or we didn't talk about emotions. We didn't.
Yeah. I also look, dude, I happen to be a therapist too. So it's like I had to lose some of that. And it's like I hate the control your emotions. I hate that word. I hate that phrase because it's like, well, no, that's not how emotions work. You can't control your emotions, but you can control your reactions to your emotions.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think that's where, if you're thinking about your role as a father and you're thinking about how you want to be, if you can demonstrate how to somewhat successfully, or just like within the realm of like appropriately regulate your own emotions in front of your child so they see an adult doing that and they kind of get they learn skills on how to do that. I think there's so much value to that. And I think that would be amazing if we saw
that's one of the most important things you can learn. You can't, like if you're in a boat, you can't, like, you don't get to pick the wind, but you can adjust the sails, right? Like how am I going to like ride this out? Right. You're not going to get to pick your emotion. You wake up, upset, you wake up angry, right? You don't get to choose that. That happens to you, but you do get to decide how you're going to react to those emotions. And that's a skill once you learn is like kind of, powerful, right? I mean, maybe the most important skill. Don't be, you are above your emotions for sure. That's what separates us. That's why we got born before we're developed, because we got these big old brains that we got to use them.
That's why I was born.
That's yeah. Yep.
So Greg, thanks
for what?
Sharing your thoughts.
Oh, dude, of course. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there too.
All the fathers.
You are appreciated.
Yes,
you are.
Big shout out to our fathers.
Yep. I had a list of like the best fathers, and I wrote like, our fathers, of course, George Washington, father of the country, and God.
I knew you were gonna say our Father,
right?
Who art in heaven.
Yeah, that's right. Not that this is a religious podcast, but there's that whole idea of Pascal's wager. I'd rather, if there is a God, we got to shout him out, or else we get in trouble.
Yeah.
Lead, don't follow. That's an important thing for my kids. Lead, don't follow.
It's funny. I think you've said it numerous times, and I think I feel the same way. You feel like you're a lot like your father.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very, very much so like my father. And
for better or for worse, right? I mean,
I'm not mad at it. Yeah,
I'm not mad at it either.
I'm glad that it's at least someone that I respect. That I'm like that. I'm I'm molded after someone who I feel is a great person, and I'm proud of that. And nobody's a perfect person,
No,
and we deal with the things that are our strong points, and we deal with the things that are the things that we could grow in, and we have to just
absolutely.
challenge ourselves with that. But
And
love to the fathers.
but the good thing is, like, I'm a different father than my father. My boys can cry. It's fine. You know what I mean? It's like they can drink out of a straw. Yeah, I wasn't allowed to do that growing up. Imagine that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like that, like I'm much sort of calmer and softer than he is. But compared to today's standards, I'm, you know, firm.
Yeah.
So
All right. So that wraps up our importance of fatherhood episode.
mhm.
We had a great week. Great week. I mean, if you guys are paying attention to the social medias, you're gonna see that we're putting in some work this last week. And we're gonna continue that.
We try our
And
best.
it's been cool seeing people responding to that. But before we talk about that, we did receive a review that we want to read. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. The title it's a very appropriate and true title. It says, "The Best Psych Podcast Ever." And this is by Jen Koz, Koz. "I absolutely love this podcast and I look forward to it every week. Dave and Greg explain concepts of psychology, various mental health diagnoses, etc., in a simple manner in which everyone can understand. Their banter is the effing best, and I always crack up while listening. I love when they bring up different top things from the 80s or 90s because I can relate since I'm in my 40s. That's right. The range of topics is always incredibly interesting, and the podcast is so much fun to listen to. I have been a social worker in the Philly child welfare system for 18 years, and you guys take my stress away while providing me with a ton of knowledge. Thank you, Jen. Amazing. This meant so much to us. When we saw this, we were immediately like, that is just like everything.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Perfect.
Philly child welfare system. I mean, I can only imagine that must be a very like difficult and challenging job. So kudos to you for doing that work and doing it for so long. That's amazing. So we appreciate you, and we hope that we can keep it coming.
Yeah,
Right.
and yeah, so I've got a fan mail here from Rain. So hello, this is longtime listener Rain again. I'm absolutely loving the show and the topics you guys have decided to cover. I've been brainstorming some topics that could be fun to go over. So here's some topics that she picks. Ready? Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Yes.
I'm actually a huge fan myself.
It's on a list.
And the Christianity Rise, which could be a bit of a long episode, but I think would be rather brilliant. So, yeah, so the Christianity one, definitely something we can dive into. We'd really have to kind of like figure out the angle on that. But the Hunter S. Thompson one, we could, well, that'll be happening.
I think the Christianity Rise, I can already envision the angle.
Yeah, do you envision yourself in like Knights Templar, like Crusades type gear?
I guess.
Yeah, okay. Little monk.
So I think we'll probably get to the Hunter S. Thompson one rather sooner.
Mm.
Actually, like Greg said, that's one of his favorite authors. And that's actually an author that I've been wanting to dig into more because I don't know enough about. So I'm gonna.
It's interesting, like, cause yeah, we're gonna have to like figure out which angle on that too. There's like a political angle, which might be a little bit outdated, but then there's some great, like, like Fear and Loathing's great. That could be an episode in and of itself. The Gonzo Papers, the Rum Diaries. There's a lot there. The Hell's Angels, when he like sort of infiltrated the Hell's Angels, awesome stuff. So we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do for that.
There was one more.
Oh, there was? Okay. Let me see. Okay, so and then there was from Kinderhook, New York, telling us that we should do an episode on cancel culture.
I feel like you've been wanting to do that for.
I would love to do. Yes, I have my feelings about that. Although I will say, I think that things are shifting where like cancel culture is becoming less of a thing.
I told you that was going to happen.
Yeah.
I did. I predicted this. For everyone listening, go back to early episodes, me and Greg arguing and me saying you have to go from extreme in order to somehow get it back into the middle. If you just work to be somewhere in the middle, then you never stay there. It goes back to the way things were. So I think that like all the pushing to get to, a solid place, I think is where people are at now. And eventually it fades away. Obviously not completely, but
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right. So everybody, thank you for listening. If you want to, I just really quick. So we are on YouTube too. So some people listen on YouTube while others are listening on, the regular platforms. There is one person in particular though that has been super interactive with us, which has been awesome. It's at Fauna Flora Faye. I just want to give you out because we just really appreciate how interactive you've been, sharing thoughts and comments on a lot of our reels that we've been sharing on there. If they're called, I don't know, on YouTube, the shorts, that's what they are. So just want to say thank you for that and just being very supportive. We appreciate it. So for everyone else, if you want to support the show, there's tons of great ways you can do that. The first of all is obviously giving a rating and review. Apple Podcasts is typically the best place to leave a review if you listen on there, but you can leave ratings on every single platform, I think. But they do really help the show. We see it start to just go out to larger audiences the more that we get those. So it's really great and it helps us keep this going. The other way is there's a subscriptions page. You can find that either on our social media. On Instagram, there's a link to it, or you can just Google unconventional therapists subscriptions, and that helps support. You can give any kind of monetary donation, and it is greatly appreciated to help this going again. And then, or just reach out to us either on social media or our email, utgnpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. That's simple. Thank you, everybody. This has been a great week. We really, really appreciate it. Everybody just being so, sharing your thoughts and just interactive. It's been awesome.
We'll try to keep it up. Help us keep it up.
Oh boy. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there and all the individuals that play such important roles in the development of children. We want to shout you guys out too. But this Father's Day, just remember you are acknowledged, you are appreciated, and you are integral. So thank you so much for being there. Have a great night, everybody. We're in love with you.
We're in love with you so much.
So much. Good night.